Good morning and a very warm welcome to day 2 of the Legal Cheek Winter Vacation Scheme in partnership with the University of Law. Now, my name is Tom Conley, editor of Legal Cheek, and I will be chairing this morning's session, Fintech and the Law. And just a reminder that there is an afternoon session, video games and digital media, that's running from 2 till 3 p.m. and you can find out more details about this, along with the whole schedule for the week in your digital programs, which is accessible through the Legal Cheek app. But back to this morning's session and Fintech and the Law. Now, to provide some context, London's evolution from traditional banking hub to a global fintech capital is arguably one of the success stories of the post-2008 financial crisis. This success is evidenced in part by I read a recent report showing that the third quarter of 2021 set an all-time record for venture capital investment in UK fintech startups at a whopping £3.6 billion. And there are now some 2,500 companies that kind of fit under the fintech umbrella across the UK. So with this in mind, I'm delighted to say this morning I'm joined by a lawyer whose job it is to help advise some of these businesses. Now, Marcus Pearl is a partner at Bryan Cave Leighton Paisner and co-head of the firm's technology and commercial transactions division. Now, he has over 18 years of commercial technology and outsourcing experience under his belt on a wide variety of strategic transactions, often cross-border in nature. And he has a particular focus on the corporate technology and financial services, which of course includes fintech. Now, a very good morning to you, Marcus. Thank you very much for joining us and giving up your time. We've got a packed audience who are really keen to hear from you. I know that you're going to deliver a presentation for us this morning. So for those of you that are tuned in at home, if you do have questions for Marcus as we're going along, please do pop them into the chat, and there'll be an opportunity for me to put a few of these to Marcus at the end of his presentation, which obviously today's session runs from 10 until 11, so I know we'll have some time at the end to put a few questions to Marcus. Now, I'm going to drop off stage and I'll hand over to Marcus. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Tom. And thanks for the very warm words, and welcome to this, what will hopefully be a relatively succinct presentation, I hope. I just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to join and speak to Legal Cheek today. It actually worried me when Tom just said that I have over 18 years, because it made me feel very old. I will tell you a little bit about my background in a minute. I think you'll be pleased to know I'm not actually controlling the slides, so I may ask for I think it's either Sam or someone else in his team who will be driving today. But you'll see throughout the presentation I'll sort of do it in two sections, as it were. So first, I'll give a bit of an overview of me, to the extent you're interested. You may not be interested, so no doubt there'll be very few questions on that. And then talk about the firm, which I assume you'll be more interested in, given the stage of where you are in your respective careers. And then, as Tom has highlighted, I want to highlight in particular one transaction that I have worked on over the last couple of years or so now, which has closed, but it's quite interesting for one of my clients that's based out of San Francisco, in the fintech sector, as Tom mentioned. And I've got a video at the end, which we did as part of a sort of a PR campaign, which was actually very interesting, and I'll come to that in a minute. So thank you very much. I hope you got your coffee ready. We'll be done by 11 with including the questions. So Sam, if you can move on to the next slide. That's apparently me when I used to wear ties, believe it or not, pre-pandemic, although I didn't really wear many ties. I think Tom mentioned I've got over 18 years of experience. So I actually worked out that, what are we now? We're coming up to 2022. So I qualified in 2001. So that makes 20 years, which is remarkable. But I actually started off as a non-lawyer at university. So I went to Manchester University, And I also studied in a political science institute in Paris called Sciences Po. And that was when I actually was able to speak very good French. So I did a political science degree with French, and law was always at the back of my mind, but never, I wasn't a law student as such. I always wanted to do, a political science degree with languages, and then see where life took me. And actually, even though there's quite a lot of people on this call, no doubt, I can let you into a secret, which is that I was very close to joining the Foreign Office. But I ended up deciding to become a lawyer. And that was partly because, my father is a retired judge. He was never a solicitor. He was actually a barrister, so he doesn't quite understand what I do. But that did influence me, I suppose, a tiny bit. But more, I think what influenced me more was the fact that my degree very much, apart from the fact that it was completely unvocational, it very much kind of lent itself to problem solving and thinking logically and laterally about issues and trying to resolve them. And I'll come on to how that might be relevant in that particular transaction that I mentioned. So I got I did a 4-year degree at Manchester. As I said, Paris was my 3rd year. And at the end of my 3rd year, I applied for various summer vacation placements, which no doubt is the stage that you guys are all at, or there or thereabouts. And I remember applying to all sorts of firms, most of which were the Magic Circle firms. I got some responses there, but because I didn't know much about law or anything. They didn't know I was an unknown entity, but Simmons and Simmons did come in as well. And I did a summer placement in their Paris office, and then obviously applied for a job following the vacation scheme that I did in their Paris office, which was actually with a whole bunch of English people as well. So it's sort of a mix. I think I was probably one of the few male candidates in my cohort. I seem to remember back in the day. I can't remember when it was. It must have been back in 1996, believe it or not, or 1997. I can't remember. But the point is, it was Simmons was quite a big firm at the time, and was very much kind of attracting certain types of students. And I applied there and got the job, which I was delighted about, because it meant that I was funded, and that's obviously something that you've probably heard a lot about in terms of how students can go through their training contract. So I then had to do what was then called the CPE, which was the conversion course, then the LPC, which is the legal practice course, and joined Simmons. And as you'll see on the slide, I did a whole range of things over 2 years, and I ended up qualifying into the commercial, what was then called the commercial group. And I did spend another 6 months in Paris, which was my final seat. And that's where you'll see there on that bullet that I was flown to Monaco, which sounds very glam. It was all rather bizarre. One minute I was sitting at my desk, and the next minute a litigator in London said that they needed a trainee who is, nearest to Monaco, and that was me, to go down to Monaco urgently to review a whole bunch of documents on behalf of the International Cricket Council, which was investigating allegations of corruption in cricket, which a long time ago, but was a major scandal. So that was very interesting. I had to go by helicopter, bizarrely. So it was quite interesting. So after 3.5 years qualified at Simmons, I got some really good experience. But it was apparent to me that I was, very focused on the commercial and technology space, and they had a good group there. But there was a burgeoning group at what was then called BLP, and I was quite keen to make that move. And it's actually the only move I've made, believe it or not. So I moved after 3.5 years qualified or so in late 2004. And it was a BLP is now called BCLP, or Brian Cave Leighton Paisner, because we merged with the US firm, as you all know. BLP was a really up and coming firm and grew exponentially, and I grew with them, I suppose, and did make partner in 2011, which was great. And moved up the ladder, made equity 2017, and the merger happened in 2018, I believe. And I've as you can see, I've got the title, which is probably a bit meaningless, but I do co-run our commercial and technology practice globally. We've got about 60 odd people globally across the network, not just in London, but in California, New York, Atlanta, etc., Paris. So I co-run that team, and we turn over about 40 million, 45 million a year. So it's a big practice. And I think it's a really interesting place to be, certainly in terms of the kind of work that we do. But one of the things that I wanted to put on my slide there before we move on to the next one was that, and I will speed up, you'll be pleased to know, was really that we, I think this is important, that as lawyers, we see so much. I see so many people come through my team. I train them up. We spend so much time trying to help our lawyers and support them, and that's a real credit to the profession, but also to our firm and to the effort and investment that we put in. And it's just lovely to see, as I have done in the last week or so, some of my former trainees make partner. And I remember my then boss, who made me partner, said the same, and I didn't really understand what he was talking about, but I really do. And it's the circle of life, and that's what we are there for, really, just to support others and see them succeed. So if we can just move to the next slide, please, Sam. So I sort of given a bit of an introduction to BCLP, but if you can just we'll go through that. So the global footprint is pretty big. I mean, we've got around about 30 offices across the network, predominantly in the US, because we merged with a national US firm called Brian Cave. But BLP, it had 14 international offices, the biggest one being in London, which is still remains the biggest, the largest office in the network. But we are very much are sort of, competing in size, as it were, with a couple of other offices in the US, one being St. Louis, which historically, you probably don't know where that St. Louis is. I certainly didn't, but it's in the Midwest. But it's actually quite an interesting industrial city in the Midwest, but it's historically where Brian Cave grew up. So we've still got quite a big office there, but there are other offices that are growing very quickly, New York and Chicago and Atlanta in particular. But London remains the most dominant office in terms of numbers. But you'll see on the list, I don't need to read out all the names, but you can see the locations that we've got. We're smaller in Asia than some firms, but we are quite focused in Asia, as you can see. We've only got 2 offices there, but we're quite focused on a particular type of work where we feel that we can make a success, because Asia is a difficult market for law firms. So if we move on to the next slide, I just want to give you a bit of a summary quickly of our focus. Now, what you'll see are 3 columns and what we call growth engines. So the first growth engine is real estate transactions, or the whole real estate sector. I am not a real estate lawyer, as I mentioned. And some of you, or a number of you, may be completely disinterested in real estate, and that's fine. We're not just about real estate, but clearly there is a historic sort of value of continuing to focus on real estate, just because BLP, as was where I came from, when we remain the #1 leader in real estate deals. And by real estate, we're not talking about domestic real estate. We don't do any residential work, obviously, given our rates and given the law firms in the city. We are probably at the forefront of the biggest and the best real estate developments that you will have heard of or see when you walk through the city or in other cities around the world. The Shard being one example, the London Olympics, which I did get involved in because there were a lot of sports sponsorship deals I did. We have done everything from, as I say, the Shard to, big hotels, to big developments across the globe, and it remains a very important part of our strategy. And the intention of the firm is to be and to remain the global #1 leader in real estate. But allied to that is corporate and finance transactions, which is our second growth engine, as it were, which is driving a lot of the growth in the firm right now. And you'll see that there are different subsections to that practice or to that department, of which mine is one subset. But we're talking M&A here, M&A and big finance transactions. And we're very much in the sort of the leader, one of the leaders in mid-market. Now, mid-market for most people is totally meaningless, because it could be anything from, a transaction that is 200 million plus all the way up to $1 billion. We're typically not, and this is quite relevant to the fintech piece, which I'll come on to in a minute. We're typically not, just to be clear, we're typically not doing startup work. In fact, we are not doing startup work. We are very much like a number of our peers, the firms that you would have heard of in your own research. We are very much at the sort of heart, and there's been evidence of this, that in terms of our rankings, of that mid-market space from 200 million up to $1 billion of M&A and finance deals. And that could be, acquiring businesses, selling businesses, private equity deals, leverage finance, derivatives work, or technology and outsourcing transactions, which is what I do. Talking about my area, for instance, just for one moment, the kind of work that we do, as I say, it's not typically, and even the deal that I'll reference later, it's not typically startup work where you're just doing a bit of advice here and there. You do have to sometimes do that. But right now I'm doing a major transformational transaction for one of my clients. I can't mention it, unfortunately. We're in the process of negotiating it, and the overall value is $1 billion over 10 years. So it's a very important sort of strategy of the firm, and you'll see this across all other firms, no doubt, in this space. There are firms that are not like that, but certainly in terms of our strategy as a firm, we are very much focused in that mid-market space. We're not necessarily doing, if Apple were to merge with Microsoft, not that they would, but if they were, we would not be doing that work, because that would be probably a very few number of firms that would be able to support that. But we will do everything sort of in between, as it were, and we're not doing the smaller stuff. And on the litigation side, it's not necessarily underpinned by value in the same way as the corporate and finance mid-market transaction space is. But on litigation, as you will see, it's very much focused on the bigger and more strategic, and strategic is the key word, the bigger and the more strategic, particularly financial services, investigations and other commercial disputes, not focused exclusively on the financial services space, but there has been a lot of that kind of litigation recently, and that's often where we can advise our clients across all sorts, the three different growth engines that I've got up there. So and that also includes things like financial crime, the antitrust and competition team, which is very important for a lot of the work that I do in that, and employment, which obviously comes into everything. So those are the three global departments. If you can just move to the next slide, please. The sectors are simply the first priority post-merger sectors. They are that are focused. They are not the ones that we are necessarily going to be only focusing on when you guys are ready to join, hopefully. These are the ones that we are immediately trying to extract the most value out of. So banking is across financial services. It's not just doing banking work, just to be clear, and it's not just acting for banks, but it is across the financial services space, which does include fintech companies. Food and ag is very much a US play. It's a huge multi-billion dollar industry, and Brian Cave, as was the #1 leader in food and agribusiness. Agribusiness is not something I have a huge amount of experience of. On the food side, that could be anything from big beer companies to food manufacturers, etc. And it's quite an interesting space, and it's very relevant to technology because it's all being, as with banking, as with real estate, and with sports, it's all being disrupted by technology, which is why what I do is quite interesting. Real estate I've talked about. Sports and entertainment, I sit on the executive committee for the sports and entertainment team. We are jointly with one or two other firms globally the leader in sports and entertainment work. So by sports and entertainment, what I mean historically, or that we are changing it. Historically in the US, we have been very focused on advising on a couple of particular areas. One being anti-doping, where sports personalities like Lance Armstrong, the infamous disgraced cyclist, was found to be doping, effectively cheating in order to win. We advised in relation to that. We didn't advise him. We advised against him on that for the Cycling Federation. So those types of anti-doping cases continue to be quite busy for our US colleagues. It's not relevant here at this stage, but what they also do in the US is a lot of sponsorship deals, big sort of baseball and American football sponsorship deals. We do, and I do quite a lot of that in the UK. We also do a lot of sports financing work in the UK, stadia development, agency work for football agencies, and I've been very involved in a lot of football. I assume this is a UK audience. I don't have to say soccer. So football and Premiership signings. I was involved in the Gareth Bale transfer and various others. So that's quite an interesting sector. And what we're doing now is to find the next sort of wave of where sports and entertainment is going. And what I think is interesting is that it's very much at the intersection of technology and how data and personal data is being monetized by sports companies and TV companies, and we're looking very closely at how we can ride that next wave of interest and business interest in that sector. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. That's just showing some of our clients. A few of those are ones that I work for. BT is a big client of the firm that I run for the firm. eBay is the same, and Nike. But there are others there that you will recognize. Tesco is an obvious one that you'll all recognize and is a big client of the firm. Moving on, please, Sam. I just wanted to say a couple of things. A lot of firms will say this, and you'll get a lot of partners like me, stand up or virtually stand up and tell you how their firm is the most culturally diverse and the most the most interesting firm in terms of trying to invest in the people that we recruit and retaining that talent. And that is not to denigrate what other people say, but one of the reasons why I've stayed at the firm is that, as I said before, it is absolutely a truism about our firm that one of the things that really, I think, distinguishes us, and I speak to law firms all the time, on deals and things like that, and I have a lot of friends and other partners in other firms and all the rest of it. I do think that BCLP and BLP, particularly as the precursor of that, spends a lot of money, frankly, because it is ultimately a financial decision, spends a lot of money and time and investment in supporting the people that we have. Because if you can't support your people, then you haven't got a business. It's as simple as that. And culture drives right through the very heart of everything we do. And I'll give you an example. So in my partner appraisal form, so I do get an appraisal, but it's more about sort of business plans rather than saying whether I'm rubbish or good. It's really about at the end of the year, looking back and then looking forward. And one of the sections of that appraisal, which I discuss with a board member, is around culture and diversity. And we have been recognized for our efforts in the market. And we've actually appointed, and we're the first firm and the only firm to date to appoint what's called a global diversity and inclusivity client relationship partner, who is called Daisy Reeves, who is, I think, amongst the very most prominent LGBT plus lawyers and personalities, not just including non-lawyers, in the market. And she has become the first client relationship partner in this area across the law firm world, which has been such a game changer for us, because what she does is she was a banking lawyer, believe it or not, but what she does is she doesn't fee earn anymore. She speaks to our clients about the very issues that that are so important to them around, making sure their law firms have the right range of people on their panels and on their presentations and things like that and their work. So she helps train clients on psychological safety, ensuring that they themselves put in place processes for their own businesses. And I've put her in touch with a lot of my clients. So it's a real sort of area of distinction for us and very important. And we do so much for our trainees, for our fact schemers. The partners we're not the sort of people that sit in our virtual or actual ivory towers. That's never been a hallmark of the firm at all. We're very different from others in that respect. And hopefully, the whole sector is changing, but we've been, I would say, sort of been doing this for many years. So I wanted to leave that one point with you in a quite a forceful way, because I think it is an area of difference. So moving on, I see that I've already done 27 minutes. So I'll try and be a bit quicker. So what can we do? Very, very good quality work. It's all incredibly international. Everything we do is pretty much international, cross-border, because of our network. I've already told you that we provide a huge amount of support and investment in our people, and we try to retain, and we do. We're very successful in retaining our people and our trainees and the people that come through. I mean, just as an example, I told you before that a lot of the partners that were trainees in my team. So it's a nice sense of loyalty that we have. Yes, there have been people leaving during COVID. That's just I think a theme that the whole working world has noticed. People have reconsidered what they want to do, but we have pretty good retention compared to our peers, and we're really putting in place all the sorts of tools that you need, particularly around support. It's not just about money. We are completely competitive in market in terms of the the salaries for associates, and I just gave a talk to my associates yesterday about their own salaries, and they've all recognized that we are completely competitive. So that's all good, but you can't just retain people because of the money, even though the money is excellent. It's more about culture, or it's certainly allied with the cultural aspects that I've described. So moving on, please, Sam. I told you about some of the things that I did back in the day, and obviously everything's moved on many years later. But it's very much centered around the same structure, in the sense that you need to do a vacation scheme in order to get a training contract. There are some open days, as you can see, and we do have brand ambassadors for certain universities. So if you want to be a brand ambassador, do reach out to our grad rec team, because it is actually a very good way of learning about the firm. And I remember doing a talk at Cambridge University a few years ago, and I met the brand ambassador, who then got so much sort of intel on the firm, and was able to use that quite nicely for interviews. So there are the deadlines, the dates. I don't know if you want to take a photo of it, or maybe we can send the slides afterwards, but I won't go through those dates now. Moving on, please. Right, so onto the fintech side of the talk. I think I'm doing okay on time, because I've got another 15 minutes. So what is apto? There's no reason why any of you would know who apto are, but let me explain. So apto, let's move on to the next slide. So apto is a fast growing, emerging fintech company based out of San Francisco, and founded and funded by one of the co-founders of Twitter. So one of my interests is, and certainly pre-pandemic, has been to really try and get to know interesting companies from the US that need to be supported on a cross-border basis, particularly out of the UK. So I used to go out to the US, and San Francisco in particular, quite a lot pre-pandemic. I've only been to the US once since January 2019. That was last month, where I had to go to New York. But pre-pandemic, I was going 3 times a year, and I picked up this client called Apto, and they did a very interesting transaction, which we then did a PR campaign about, which is what you can see on that slide that says a client story. And client story is a BCLP term for an interesting client narrative that we then pushed out into various channels. So if you can move to the next slide, you'll see that we pushed, I think it's in the following slide, that we pushed it out. There you go. We pushed it out onto social media. We had lots of internal communications about it. We had a video, which we can show you in a minute. We did all sorts of other YouTube things. If you go back to the previous slide, please, Sam. The matter at hand that I was instructed on and then worked on for probably about, well, it must have been a year and a half at least, was a crypto matter. And what was interesting about this matter was that Coinbase, that some of you may have heard of, was and has launched, or was in the process of launching, the UK's first crypto debit card. So it is what's called a white labeled Coinbase debit card. So if you were to Google either now or after this presentation, the Coinbase, which is by definition a crypto based currency debit card, this is the relevant matter. So I didn't advise Coinbase as such. I advise one of the partners to that deal called Apto Payments. And what Apto Payments do is, as I say, it's a fintech company, and they are the ones that helped provide what I can only call the engine behind the card. So you can't have a card. Coinbase, obviously, you know, as I say, it was in their name. It's a white label product, but they relied very heavily on apto. So apto effectively provided the tools for the launch of this particular card scheme, which has been very successful. And what we had to do was advise apto in relation to, one, its relevant commercial arrangements with Coinbase. And there was actually what we call a tripartite agreement with another company called PaySafe, which did all the processing of the payments. We did the commercial arrangements, which I obviously I advised on, but we also provided all the financial services and regulatory sort of issues. And as you can imagine, this is a highly complex area, and it was the first of its kind in the UK market, and probably the first of its kind anywhere. I don't think it had been launched in the US at that point. So there were lots of payment services and other financial services regulatory issues that arose as part of that transaction. If you might want to go 2 slides ahead now. Yeah. So you can see in the bottom left is the client, Meg Nakamura, who is the co-founder of Apto. Lovely lady who is a real visionary. And I think this business is going to take off even further. She spoke as part of this client story. So we did a sort of a 2-way presentation where she was in San Francisco office speaking, which we'll see in a minute in the video, and then I was speaking with a couple of colleagues in the UK, and it went out onto all those channels that I described, and the whole deal actually got announced on the FT. It's on the front page of the FT at the time. So it was just a really impressive sort of PR campaign that very few law firms, I think, really do. And we've done a number of them now, and mine was the first. So I think we might want to go on to the video unless it's next. This just shows that's just an example of what it looked like, both internally and it's on our website, actually, you'll see. So if you move on to the next slide after that, please. There you go. Watch the video. This is going to be a 4-minute video. So if you play that, that's great.
My name is Meg Nakamura. I'm a co-founder and the CEO of Apto Payments. Apto Payments is in San Francisco, and we also have colleagues in Barcelona, Spain. We go to bat for new companies trying to change the world in financial services. We saw tremendous growth in Fintech and specifically challenger banks in Europe. And with Coinbase, we thought that this is an opportunity to challenge some of those banks in Europe and globally. What we really wanted to do was launch the right product for a Coinbase customer. And just like how you interact with your bank account, we wanted to create a debit card that allows users to spend their cryptocurrency. The Coinbase card launch was really exciting because it was the first launch in Europe. Firsts are always very exciting. Where we wanted help or advice was really in the area of fundamentally expanding our business into Europe. It was really hard for us to know what the gold standard is in terms of compliance and designing the right type of a program. We were introduced to BCLP many years ago here in San Francisco, and our partnership with Stan Koppel has been terrific. And when this opportunity for Coinbase in Europe came along, it was a no-brainer to really ask Stan for an introduction to his colleagues in London.
It was quite clear to me when I was first instructed on this matter that there'd be a number of challenges for Apto in launching this product in the UK, particularly from a regulatory and payments perspective.
One of the key challenges with this project and with projects of this type is that there are multiple parties involved, each with their own regulatory concerns and commercial objectives. The documentation had to satisfy all parties, and that meant we had to work with everybody, commercial and legal, collaboratively and transparently.
There is a lot of uncertainty surrounding cryptocurrency. That means careful consideration and analysis are needed to make sure apto is comfortable with their regulatory position.
The team in London really got it, and I think that's a big piece for a startup when time is your most precious resource. Marcus, Lewis, Kai, they got what the opportunity was. They could understand how we wanted to differentiate ourselves, and they were tremendously helpful.
It was fundamental to our advice that apto's position was future-proofed, and we did that by ensuring that the documentation was appropriate for other similar card programs, no matter what the underlying store of value.
I would advise other fintech companies seeking to do equivalent product launches to that of apto in the UK or in Europe more generally, to have the right advisors to be able to handle the regulatory aspects, particularly around payments in the UK. This was so state-of-the-art, it was such an innovative product that it needed advisors that were really up for it.
Our mission is really to stand up a global issuance platform. Right now we're live in the US and in Europe. We very much are working towards the mission of expanding this business so when a customer comes to us, we can issue anywhere around the world. These products are going to be relevant, and certainly BCLP can help us navigate each of those expansions.
There you go. So that was what was posted all over social media and on our website and internally as well. And as I said, it's very much been a sort of a precursor of other client stories that we've been putting out into the market. So as I say, I wanted to show it for two reasons. One, so that I could actually bring to life a particular transaction, because you can talk about, deals or cases until you're blue in the face, but unless you actually see some of the personalities involved, it's quite difficult to bring it to life. So I did it for that reason, but also to show how, as a firm, as I mentioned, we're very proactive in getting our story out, getting our narratives right, interacting with PR, interacting with social media. I put a lot of content onto LinkedIn, and all our colleagues, all our associates and partners across the firm are very much encouraged to do that. We have PR advisors, we have a big marketing team that help us with a lot of this stuff. And, given how important the messaging is in the public domain, that's something that we as lawyers have to be very alive to. So I wanted to sort of illustrate that point as well. If you move on, please, to the next slide. I think that's come through on the video, but as I said, on that particular deal, there were various things that we had to look at, obviously, as I mentioned. But one of the sort of, 3 big points that I wanted to leave with you was around when you're, hopefully when you qualify as lawyers, the thing to really to think about is how, particularly when you're if you're a transactional lawyer, though it's equally relevant, I think, to litigators, is there's no point putting in place a transaction between parties if it's only good for a year or a couple of months or maybe 2 years. You really need to, depending on obviously the commercial terms, you really need to think about future-proofing a deal and making sure that you're thinking about all the different permutations that may arise and how to protect your client accordingly. And interestingly, during the pandemic, this came up as a big issue because, of course, no one could have future-proofed their deals or their cases against COVID. and that became a very thorny issue as a potential way for parties, as part of commercial arrangements or corporate arrangements, to get out of their obligations, relying on what's called a force majeure. And that became quite an area of real advice that a lot of the law firm community was very involved in, as was I. And that's probably an exception to this point, but otherwise, you need to think about future-proofing the work that you're doing to protect your clients accordingly. In this particular transaction, it really helped that we've got a lot of fintech experience. That, as you could see from the video, it wasn't just turning up and trying to pen a deal. It was thinking about and advising on all the regulatory issues, and regulation has become it was very tight on crypto back then, but it was even tighter, and there were even more rules that we had to look at as the deal continued. So that was a key driver to us being instructed and doing a good job. And finally, and this is really important, and that's probably one of my last points before we hand over to Q&A, is around making sure that when you're working for clients, that you draw in the experience of your colleagues. And I think the beauty of working for a big international law firm is that there's lots of areas of expertise. There's no client expects me, when they pick up the phone, to know that much about tax law. No client is expecting me to know much about real estate. No client is expecting me to know how to run a huge court of appeal case. But what they do expect is that I can reach across the aisle to ask for input and advice from my relevant colleagues. And if you work for a firm of our size and reputation with that depth of expertise, you can achieve what your client is expecting. If you work for a small firm, for instance, that does just a niche area, that might be fine as well. But you have to obviously be very cognizant of the fact that you may only be advising in that one area. So it's been a sort of important facet of my career that I've been able to rely on my colleagues and also expand my client base as a result of utilizing the skill sets of my colleagues. So cross-disciplinary approaches to transactions and to client relationships is really important. So I think that's pretty much it. We've got time, 10 to 15 minutes or so of Q&A. I don't know how we're going to be doing this. Maybe there's a comments section, but I'll hand that to Tom.
Hi, Marcus. Firstly, thank you very much for that excellent presentation. That was a really cool video as well. That went down really well in the chat. I think we'll start with some fintech questions, and then we'll maybe get a couple of general careers questions, if that's okay with you. But maybe just to start, having heard stories like you described there, your work with apto and the kind of products and services that, these companies are developing, I'd be keen to get your view on what kind of impact you think fintech will have on kind of more traditional financial institutions. Are the big banks worried of these players like apto coming into the market?
It's an excellent question, Tom. Thanks. I think you can answer that question by dissecting it in two ways, really. The first point is that if you'd asked me that question maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I think I would answer in a very different way, which would be, yes, the banks are scared. The fintech companies are coming. And why were they scared? Because the banking sector had gone through, following the global financial crisis, so much disruption themselves, but they were trying to get their own houses in order, as it were. And they had effectively, the big banks in particular, had effectively, and I use this word rather generically rather than legally, just to be clear, they'd effectively had a bit of a monopoly on or dominance on consumer behavior. The global financial crisis came along, and they had other things to sort out, obviously, and to address post that crisis. And what happened was that the fintech community exploded in lots of different ways, from payments to all the crypto to all sorts of interesting processing and technologies, to blockchain as it became more relevant to the financial services space. And I think the banks, to answer your question in that first sense, I think were very scared and didn't quite know what to do. Some of them tried to embrace them, but I think there were, because I remember even speaking to Barclays about incubating various different financial fintech startup companies, some of whom have become, have IPO'd, others have fallen by the wayside. But some of the banks certainly embraced it, but not everybody did. And I think what has since happened, which is my second part of the question or the answer, is that the banks have realized, particularly in the sophisticated sort of financially regulated markets, including the UK and the US, the banks have realized, I think, that they can't stop it, and they themselves are fintech companies. So I'll give you a quote from Blankfein, who was the then CEO of Goldman's. I think he stood down now, but he was the CEO or the chairman of Goldman's, and he said Goldman's is not a financial services company. Goldman's is a technology company. That is a remarkable statement by the chairman of one of the most prominent financial institutions in the market, Goldman Sachs, which is a client of the firm. It is a technology company. Now, they people on this call and others may disagree with that statement, but he's making the point quite acutely and cogently that the banking sector or the financial services industry has already been disrupted and is continuing to be disrupted by technology and by fintech in particular. And therefore the banks, what's interesting, is come full circle. Instead of just embracing it and saying, as I said, initially a lot of the banks did, and just saying, okay, we've got to think about putting in place an arm, as or subsidiary that's looking at this revolution around fintech. Instead, they themselves have become fintech companies. And, some of the biggest IPOs that have happened in the last couple of years have been fintech companies, and they haven't necessarily been tiny companies that have grown up, over a year or so in the way that Facebook did. These are, these were all very big businesses already in their own right that then pivoted to becoming fintech companies and then have grown in that way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think that we're now in a world and an era where technology and fintech in particular, as it applies to financial services, kind of, I would say, travels or vacillates right through the whole, across all sectors, but in financial services, it travels right through the industry. That's not to say that there aren't some markets, and the US is quite an interesting one, where there are still what's called community banks, which are just exactly what it says on the tin. They are banks for, their local community to go and, pay in checks. I haven't used a check for, I don't think I've written out a check for years. Half of your students probably don't even have checkbooks. I was given a checkbook when I joined the Freshers Week, but no one used checks anymore. Some might, but the point is that there are still some banks which have very traditional banking services. They will die, in my view, and they will be ripe for disruption unless they decide to change themselves.
Thanks for that, Marcus. We had a couple of questions of a similar theme here, so I'm just going to try and summarize it. But, you're working with clients that are working with, cutting edge technology in the financial sector. And we've got a few students that are curious, just, you know, how tech savvy, Marcus, do you have to be when you're advising these clients?
That's really interesting. I think the reality is, Tom, you know, that our clients know that we're lawyers, right? They don't come to me to well, even if they are the lawyers themselves, because I can get instructed by both the lawyers and the business, right? They could be technologists, they could be financial controllers, they could be lawyers, and usually the lawyers themselves, to the extent that our clients have legal functions, not all of them do, but some of them do, most of them do, and therefore there will be a lawyer, an in-house lawyer involved. I don't believe that our clients really expect me and my colleagues to understand the nuts and bolts of every single aspect of the technologies that they're putting in place or that they're procuring. But if you don't understand how these deals work, then you can't advise on the operation, on the legal ramifications of the operational aspects of the transactions. And if you're a litigator, which I'm not, but if you are a litigator doing technology litigation, which we do quite a lot of, if you don't understand how these transactions operate, you can't look at the I think the arguments on behalf of your client, because you're having to obviously argue certain points in support of a particular issue at hand, and often it becomes quite technical. So I think the answer is you don't have to be you know, a technologist, a nerdy technologist. I don't think I am. I hope I'm not nerdy. You don't have to be you know, an IT developer to be a technology lawyer, but you do certainly need to understand and get to understand the issues that and the priorities that your clients expect you to navigate through in order to advise them properly.
Thanks for that, Marcus. Now, we can't really talk about financial technology without mentioning cryptocurrencies. And obviously, you touched upon that with, again, your work with apto. I'm just curious, in your kind of professional opinion, and bearing in mind you're probably advising clients that work in this sector, what's the future of crypto, Marcus?
Interesting question. Again, you know, things have changed and hugely changed in the last, you know, during COVID and even before then. A few years ago, I would have answered that by saying that it was subject to a huge amount of regulatory scrutiny, particularly in the US and here. But now I think that there is not just a future, but it's, you know, cryptocurrency has become an everyday currency, and you know, it's not just a fanciful kind of idea that only a few mega rich you know, investors are playing with. It's something that, you know, any one of us, you know, any one of the students on this call, I'm not suggesting that they have to, I'm not giving investment advice, but any one of them could open up an account within seconds and trade trade obviously at their own risk in cryptocurrency. And you know, a Coinbase as a platform, by way of example, is I've got a Coinbase account. It's a very user-friendly, easy way of playing. I don't play with of lots of money on purpose, because it's just something, you know, you've got to be very careful with crypto, which is obviously why it's subject to so much scrutiny, and it's up and down like any other market or index. But I believe that it is embedded into the current financial narrative, and it's only going to continue and become a mainstay of you know, global currency that people, I think, in the future will be paid in Bitcoin. I believe that people are already being paid in Bitcoin in certain companies, and it's something that the financial regulators will continue to keep a watchful eye on, to ensure that there is, in particular around financial crime, that there are safeguards in place to protect against any potential financial crime issues, which is obviously highly relevant. But that said, I think that the regulators have become a lot more comfortable, particularly in the UK and the US. That's not to say that it's the Wild West anymore, because I don't think it is. And I think it's important that our regulators continue to look very closely at ensuring that we have the right market participants, and that these market participants are properly vetted before they market their products. So you take a Coinbase, for instance, which was IPO'd. They became they've grown exponentially in the last 5 years, and then obviously floated recently. They obviously had to go through a huge amount of regulatory vetting in order to get to the next stage of their development. But not all companies will be able to do that. So hopefully there will be continued sort of regulatory scrutiny.
Thanks for that, Marcus. We're almost out of time, but very, very quickly, we had just one general question in the chat there. And someone asked, what part of your work do you find the most exciting and why?
I think when I've been on an important and strategic transaction for my client and achieved a successful outcome for them, and they've just thanked us for our efforts, and we've actually done something that's helped their business and move it to the next level, then I realize that that's the reason for being a lawyer.
Yeah, great response, Marcus. And thank you very much for your time this morning.
You're welcome.
It's gone down really well in the chat. Please show your appreciation for Marcus. For those of you tuned in now, just a few pointers. Just to remind you that there is an afternoon session, 2 till 3 p.m. That's video games and digital media. And the speakers for that are Peter Lewin and Isabel Davies, and they're both associates, or a senior associate and associate at Wigan. And just a reminder that the case study is attached to that session, not this session. So the case study is attached to this afternoon session. We're now going to move across to the networking. So you can head over there, 15 minutes of networking. You access that using the button on the left-hand side with the logo on it that's a handshake. Not that we're doing that at the minute, but so there's the button on the left-hand side. You click through to that, and that'll take you to the networking. So thank you very much for joining me for the morning session. We'll see you back here at 2 o'clock for the afternoon session. And once again, thank you very much to Marcus for giving up your time this morning.
Thank you. Take care.
Cheers. Thanks, Marcus.
Bye. Bye.